Somerset, a county in England's southwest, is a land rich in myths and folklore. I've come down from the northeast to explore this beautiful part of the country and immerse myself in tales of otherworldly mysteries and supernatural legends. Meeting up with my friend and Somerset native Joe, otherwise known as the Wessex Nomad, I'll be visiting over 20 locations and telling you tales of vengeful pirates, black dogs, witches' caves, sacred sites and holy wells, heroic kings, haunted castles, and the devil himself. So, grab a glass of cider and prepare to get off the beaten track as we explore the folklore of Somerset. The first stop on my journey is a site that I've wanted to see for many years. Glastonbury, one of the most iconic sites associated with the legends of King Arthur. Here we find a place where history and myth have blended together over the centuries. In his History of the Kings of Britain, Geoffrey of Monmouth said that the wounded King Arthur was carried to the Isle of Avalon to be healed, and Glastonbury is one of the main contenders for the location of Avalon. The Tor rises dramatically from the Somerset levels, which were once marshland, so at one point in time this place would have been an island. It's said that here, Arthur lies in a state of undeath, sleeping, if you like, in a beautiful paradise of sorts in the other world, with Glastonbury being the entrance to this hidden place. It's also said that the Lady of the Lake, the guardian of the legendary Excalibur, resided in the mystical waters near Glastonbury. Legends emerged in the Middle Ages that Joseph of Arimathea, one of the men that helped carry Jesus' body down from the cross, came to Britain, bringing with him the Holy Grail, and founded an abbey here in Glastonbury. The stories of this place's early connection with Christianity expanded, and more lore was added. Most notably, the idea that Jesus himself came to Glastonbury as a young boy, alongside Joseph of Arimathea, sometimes regarded to be his great-uncle. This legend inspired William Blake to write his famous poem Jerusalem. And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the Holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? Glastonbury has long been a site associated with grand ancient figures, fairies, magic, and great spiritual power. It's a special place for Christians and pagans alike, and provided such incredible views across the county. You could feel a lot of energy in this place, and I could see why it's so cherished by people from Somerset, and the English people as a whole. But moving on, our second stop was Cadbury Castle, a huge Bronze and Iron Age hill fort that likewise boasted some beautiful scenery. And it's here that the Arthurian legends continued. Local tradition, first written down by John Leyland in 1542, held that Cadbury Castle was the site of King Arthur's seat of power, Camelot. There are a great number of sites claiming to be the site of Camelot across Britain, just as there are sites said to be Arthur's resting place. But Cadbury Castle has long been regarded as one of the most famous and well recognised of these suggested locations. But we're not here to debate history and archaeology of such claims. I'm here to document what the legends say, and we can't let academics get in the way of a good story. Now, according to local tradition, on Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, or Midsummer's Night, depending on the variation, the spectral figures of King Arthur and his knights on horseback have been seen riding down from the brow of this hill and going to water their horses at a spring next to Sutton Montis Church.
Seems like the spring beyond that field. You can hear it from here. We then headed to the village of Chilton, Cantello, once the home of a soldier from the English Civil War who fought for Cromwell, named Theophilus Broome. When the monarchy was restored in England, Theophilus was shocked to see that a number of those responsible for the death of Charles I had been exhumed from their graves and their bodies beheaded and displayed at the Tower. Fearing that this might happen to him too, he arranged that upon his death his body should be kept safe in what had been his home in the latter part of his life. He died in 1670 and was buried in the church here in Chilton Cantello, and his head remained in the house next door, where allegedly it remains to this day. Attempts to reunite the head with Theophilus's body over the centuries have apparently resulted in moans and groans coming from the skull.
There have been several stories over the years that blame the skull for various deaths and odd occurrences, one of which involved a man mocking the skull upon viewing it, and later that day he was involved in a serious car accident. An older account from the 1770s reported that a man was killed by a fallen slate from the roof of the church when trying to bury the skull on the church grounds. We knocked on the door of the farmhouse that the skull is said to reside in, and we asked the owners if the story was true, and if we were able to see the skull. I've not filmed the house to protect their privacy, but we can confirm that the skull is very much real, and is kept inside a locked cabinet. We were allowed to see it, on condition that we didn't film it. Far from it being malevolent though, the owner of the skull, Mr. Kenton, gave the impression that it had protected his family over the years that it had been in his possession, and made it clear that it doesn't scream, despite most publications and coverage of the story referring to it as the Screaming Skull. Perhaps though, if we were once again to try and reunite the skull with the body, we might hear the moans and groans that others have heard in centuries past. It's time to go underground for our next story. The Wookey Hole Caves are a series of limestone caverns on the southern edge of the Mendip Hills near Wells, the smallest city in England. It's a site of special scientific interest, and has been used by humans and Neanderthals for tens of thousands of years. There's even evidence of cave hyenas living here. It's the site of the first cave dive to take place in Britain in the 1930s, and it's also used to mature cheddar cheese thanks to its constant low temperature. And of course, there's also a legend associated with this place. A story of a witch that was said to live here centuries ago, with only her familiars for company.
All the villagers in the local area were desperate to get rid of her, and so they turned to Glastonbury Abbey to help. The abbot sent a brave and determined monk to confront the witch, bringing with him a cross and a chalice. As he entered the caves, the witch confronted him at the entrance, and a heated argument broke out between the two. The witch refused to leave her home and fled deeper into the caves. This was something that the villagers had warned the abbot about. Under no circumstances was he to follow the witch, as they believed that the caves were a gateway to hell, and nobody who went further than the entrance ever returned.
But the monk's faith was strong, and he believed that he would be safe so long as he had God, and so he ventured deeper to seek out the witch. The River Axe runs through the Wookey Hole Caves, and the monk dipped his chalice into the water and blessed it, creating holy water. Deep in the darkest part of the cave, the monk and the witch had their standoff. The witch threw her curses but to no effect, and the monk sprinkled her with holy water, to which she let out a blood-curdling scream and suddenly fell silent. The holy water had turned her to stone, and she's still there to this day. You can come and get a glimpse of her here, referred to as the Witch Stone. This is also said to be a dog, which is quite sad because what did he do to deserve such a fate? Joe then took me to the lovely coastal village of Porlock, the home of one of my favourite ghost stories. This tale concerns a pirate by the name of Lucket, although there are those that say he was a smuggler, but an evil man by all accounts, yet a rich one. His years of plundering, thieving and other crimes committed on the high seas had made him quite a small fortune. Porlock was his home, and he'd arranged a Christian burial upon his death, and that's what he received. A poorer man with a background such as his wouldn't have received the same honour, but Lucket had his ways of persuading people.
But a week after his burial, his ghost appeared in the town and quickly set about tormenting and terrifying the local people that were once likewise afraid of him when he was living. But now Lucket had no fear of capture or punishment. He could terrorise people as much as he wanted to, with no repercussions. The village priest tried to stop the ghost using the power of prayer and faith, but this had no effect. It only served to provoke Lookett even more, causing the chaos he inflicted upon the town to intensify. It wasn't long before Porlock became a total ghost town, no pun intended, but people were too scared to leave their homes due to encountering this menace.
It was decided that only a group exorcism could stop this madness, something that was once better known as laying a ghost. The local clergy mustered as many priests as they could from the surrounding parishes, and they managed to get 12 in total. Now they had strength in numbers. One evening, they gathered together in the church in Porlock and began to say a service with the intention of laying the evil ghost of Lookett. The malevolent phantom hadn't attempted to stop the 12 men from walking towards the church, so they assumed he was no doubt wary of such a large number of holy men together. And of course, being sacred ground, he couldn't enter the church, so there was high hopes that the service would be a success. But halfway through this service, the doors burst open with such noise and force as if a battering ram had smashed it down. The priests stopped their prayers in shock and turned around. There in the doorway was the ghost of Lookett, looking more menacing and angry than ever. Then, somehow managing to get inside the church, was the ghost of Lookett. All of the priests ran to the altar for protection, but Lookett ran down the aisle, sword brandished, screaming and shouting, and then, as he approached the altar where the priests were, he vanished. They didn't stay to finish the service. They fled. Clearly there was no stopping this ghoul, and in response, Lookett's confidence only grew. Porlock was now completely his. There was one man yet to arrive though, a priest from the nearby village of Watchet. He'd heard from a couple of priests that were there the night of the laying what had happened, and so decided to approach the problem in a different way. He walked through the deserted streets of Porlock and finally came face to face with Lookett. The priest challenged the ghostly pirate to a riddle contest down by the coast. The proposed deal was, if Lookett won, then the priest would submit to his power. But if the priest won, then Lookett would submit to his authority. Too prideful and curious even to turn down this offer, Lookett agreed, and so the two men went down to the beach and began. But the priest got the better of him. Lookett was furious. He let out pained howls of anger, but the deal had been struck. He was now under the control of the holy man. The priest had brought a donkey back to the beach and forced the evil spirit to mount it. He then walked the donkey along the beach and back to Watchet, with Lookett upon its back, humiliating the once proud pirate. The locals had come out and were all pointing and laughing as he sat there upon the ass. But the ghost's power had not yet totally vanished. He ripped out the eye of one of the men laughing at him as his final act of wickedness. Eventually, they stopped and the priest ordered Lookett to enter a small iron box he had in his possession. The ghost was powerless to resist, and so he went inside. The priest locked it and cast it into the sea, ridding Porlock of the ghost once and for all. Those that know this story, though, do worry, however, that a strong tide may one day bring him back. Next, we visited the site of the Battle of Sedgemoor, where the Duke of Monmouth's ill-fated rebel army were defeated in 1685. His army of around 5,000 were mainly armed with nothing more than farming implements and were slaughtered by the gunfire of James II's troops as they attempted a night attack across the Sedgemoor marshland. The Duke's rebellion was launched in the June of that year when he attempted to claim the throne, and he mustered a decent amount of support among the people of Somerset. Like many battlefields that witness such terror and carnage, there's a good amount of ghost stories and legends tied to this place. One legend involves the young lad that fought in Monmouth's army and was captured after the battle. He was famed throughout the area as being an exceptional runner, and so his captors told him that they'd spare his life if he could keep up with the pace of a horse. He accepted the challenge and managed to stay beside a horse as it galloped away. Yet, despite passing the test, he was put to the sword all the same. His sweetheart was so devastated by the news that she drowned herself in the shallow waters of the marshland. Her ghost remains to this day, and can sometimes be seen. And if you listen carefully, you might also hear the sound of a man and a horse running at full pelt. We now head to Dunster Castle, which has sat in this strong commanding location for nearly 1,000 years. This is considered to be Somerset's most haunted castle, and one of the most haunted castles in the whole of England. One of the most commonly reported ghosts that roams the castle is the Man in Green. He's often spotted in the 17th century stable block, part of which is now used as the National Trust's gift shop. Staff have reported seeing him walking through the area before disappearing. The ghosts of English Civil War soldiers, specifically royalists, have been seen throughout the castle, alongside the sounds of men shouting, slamming doors and heavy footsteps. The most haunted room in the castle is said to be the King Charles bedroom, the name taken from the second King Charles, who slept here in 1645. There are often feelings of unease and malevolence reported here. Another spectre that calls Dunster a home is the Grey Lady, sighted in several rooms and quite frequently. Her most common haunt is the Oak Staircase, a spot which has been exorcised as a result of people feeling such a dark presence there. But despite many attempts to rid the castle of her, she still remains very active. This next stop isn't a place famous for its ghost stories or tales of monsters, but it is somewhere that I had to visit due to its significance in British history. This is Cheddar Gorge, one of England's most spectacular landscapes. At almost 400 feet deep and 3 miles long, it's also England's largest gorge. The gorge would have begun forming about 1 million years ago during the last ice age, when the melting glaciers formed a river, which over time started to carve into the limestone rock, creating the huge cliffs we see today. So too did the river make its way underground and created the famous Cheddar Caves. And it was in 1903 that something very interesting was found in Gough's Cave. Britain's oldest complete skeleton, known today as Cheddar Man, was discovered. The real skeleton is today at home in the Natural History Museum in London, but here we can see a replica. It's thought that he was in his 20s when he died, around 10,000 years ago.
So this here, Cheddar Gorge, I mean, this is somewhere that's very close to my heart. I mean, I've been coming here on a regular basis since I was a kid. To have this so close to where I grew up has been quite a blessing. I mean, it's a busy day here in Cheddar today, but coming here on a quiet day, you know, it's off season, in the evening, seeing the sunset, you've got a whole gorge to yourself. It's magic. It really is magic.
Clearly Somerset means a lot to people like Joe, whose love of his home county is evidenced in the way that he speaks about it, and in the work that he produces on his channel, the Wessex Nomad, which I'd encourage everyone to take a look at. I was grateful to be shown around all these places by a local expert, but my tour of Somerset was nowhere near finished. There were still so many places that I wanted to explore, and next on my list was Exmoor, allegedly home to the Exmoor Beast, a story I was reminded of while drinking a pint of it in the pub in Porlock. Exmoor is a huge expanse of moorland that covers parts of West Somerset and North Devon. It's a popular spot for walkers, campers and nature photographers, you name it, but there's said to be something sinister that lives out here on the moors. A big cat, a beast. The creature came to national attention in 1983 when a South Molton farmer named Eric Lee claimed to have lost over 100 sheep in a 3-month period, all of which had been killed by injuries to their throats. While the media outlets began offering rewards for footage of the beast, the British government took reports quite seriously, deploying Royal Marine snipers to hunt and kill the creature. The existence of big cats in the British countryside has been debated for decades. Most of the alleged sightings have come since the Dangerous Wild Animals Act of 1976 made it illegal to keep untamed pets. Some experts have suggested that this led to owners of exotic cats, such as pumas and lynx, simply releasing their animals into the countryside. One of the most recent sightings that I can find comes from 2018, when a 72-year-old man from Somerset reportedly saw it leap out in front of him while he was driving his car in Devon. The previous year, a local walker was out in the Somerset Quantock Hills, and she spotted what she thought to be the beast in the grass. So, is there really a beast that roams Exmoor? Is there more than one? Are they the descendants of released exotic pets, or is there something more supernatural about them? While I'm on Exmoor though, I came across an unusually long clapper bridge made of stone slabs crossing the River Barle. It's referred to as the Tarr Steps. It's sometimes claimed to be prehistoric, yet it's more likely to be medieval. But how did it get here? Supposedly, it wasn't the locals that built it.
Now legend has it that the devil built this bridge in one night, carrying the stones into this area with his apron. But only he wanted to use it, and he said that anyone that tried to cross it would be torn to pieces. Now, the locals weren't too happy about this because they wanted to use the bridge as well. So the parson comes up with a little idea.
He had people bring a cat to the bridge and made it cross first, and sadly, the poor animal was promptly slaughtered by the devil's curse. But the parson claimed that this sacrifice had broken the curse, and so, feeling confident in his judgment, he then stepped onto the bridge and proceeded to cross. The locals watched on nervously, and the parson made it to the halfway point, but then the devil appeared. The two hurled insults at each other, and the trees wilted all around the banks of the river. But in the end, the devil fled, and the bridge was safe to cross from that point onward. Or so the story goes. Moving on, I then headed to Shervage Wood, where allegedly a long wingless dragon lived a long time ago. Given that Somerset's flag has a dragon on it, it's about time we had a dragon tail. In any case, the dragon was so terrifying that the local woodcutter dared not venture into the area to chop wood. But in the end, desperately needing work and money, he ventured into Shervage Woods on a quiet day. All morning he worked, felling trees and collecting wood. No sign of the dragon, but he was very on edge, knowing that it must be somewhere. He sat down among the ferns for a rest and a bite to eat, but the big log that he sat on heaved under him. It was, of course, the dragon. With great courage and in a rush of adrenaline, he jumped to his feet and sank his axe into the beast before fleeing. Nobody knows if this blow killed the dragon. Some say that it split it in half and the two halves wriggled off in different directions before it died. I did hear though that at Crowcombe Church, to the south of Shervage Woods, there are some amazing wood carvings on the pews, and one of these depicts the slaying of a dragon. From my research, there seems to be a chicken or the egg situation going on here. Some historians and folklorists suggest that the local stories of dragons, such as this one, are more recent tales that give an explanation for the carvings, and others suggest that the carvings are depictions of the stories themselves. I think that there's certainly a number of age-old dragon tales that we've lost the full details of over time, but these legends have remained in some form or another. I then headed to the village of Crowcombe, wanting to investigate for myself these wooden panels that are found inside the Church of the Holy Ghost. This was such a quaint little village, very sleepy and tucked away in the Quantocks.
This is a really beautiful church. In fact, I'd probably say it's one of the most beautiful that I've seen in the last month, and I've been to a lot of churches, and most people come to this church specifically to see the early 16th century bench ends, beautiful engravements and carvings. The Green Man is heavily featured in a lot of them as well, but there's one in particular that I want to show you. Look at this, the dragon. There is actually another curiosity about this church, but for this story, I'm going to tell it to you in the porch. Oh, that is a heavy door. Now, there was no belief in Somerset that anyone that stood in the porch of a church on Midsummer's Eve or Halloween could watch as all the wraiths of the people fated to die in the next year walked through the door of the church and sat down to attend their own funeral service. There was one story in particular at this church that really caught my attention.
Folklorist Ruth Tongue collected the following two stories. The first concerns a local braggart drunk on cider, who took on a bet that he'd sit in Crowcombe Church until midnight and see whose ghost went into the church and never came out. He never spoke of what he saw, but the next day he was white as a sheet. The second story took place in the 1870s, when a widower heard stories of ghosts in the churchyard and so waited in the porch in hopes of seeing his wife, clearly unaware of the danger of doing this. Nobody knows if he did see her, presumably not, since she'd already passed on. But he didn't live long himself after doing this. The danger is, of course, the risk you take in seeing your own ghost at the front of the procession, and thus you'll know that you will die within the next year. On the subject of ghosts, let's have some more tales of ghouls and spectres. One spot that I had to see was of course Dead Woman's Ditch. There was once a charcoal burner that lived in these woods called John Walford. He was engaged to a woman, but was having relations with another woman at the same time. She was a fairly stupid girl named Jane, and the daughter of another charcoal burner in the area. She used to frequent his hut in the woods and make herself available to him. In due course, she became pregnant, and her father and the parish overseer forced John to marry her, much against his will, as now he had to call off his previous engagement. On the 5th of July 1789, as the ill-suited married couple were walking home drunk, John had enough of the girl and strangled her, dumping her body in a ditch. His crime was soon discovered, and he was hanged at the scene of the murder, and his body gibbeted there. The gibbet remained here until the early 19th century, but some people still claim to hear it rattling on windy nights, and smelling rotten flesh in the air. His ghost, and the ghost of his murdered wife, are said to haunt the area. A true story, but what's strange is that Dead Woman's Ditch was already named Dead Woman's Ditch in 1789, indicating that a woman had been murdered on this spot previous to the murder of Jane Walford. A story that's now lost to time. I'd heard that wild horses could be found in Somerset, and as I was leaving Dead Woman's Ditch, I saw a couple. Absolutely beautiful animals, and very friendly. I felt very lucky to experience this. Hello. Hello. Whoa. At a crossroad outside the town of Ilminster, on the Dowlish Road, is a spot marked on the map as Mary Hunt's grave, where people still lay flowers to this day. Now, Mary's grave itself is long gone. All that's here is this post with Mary Hunt's grave written on it. So her body is somewhere here under all this undergrowth. Now, no one really knows who Mary was. Some say that she was a prostitute, some say that she was a witch, a gypsy, a woman who murdered her husband, a woman that was a victim of murder, a woman that killed herself because she was pregnant. No one can really agree, but one thing that everyone does agree on is that Mary Hunt's ghost haunts this crossroad around midnight. People were buried at crossroads for a few reasons. To confuse the spirit of the dead person, preventing them from returning and causing trouble. They were also often used as burial spots of suicides or outlaws, with crossroads often being boundary markers, thus excluding them from society. And of course, denying them from consecrated ground. We can guess then that Mary Hunt, whoever she was, had some terrible things happen to her, or did terrible things herself. But whatever she did, it's still with her, as her ghost cannot seem to find rest. I then travelled to Castle Neroche, but if you're expecting anything as grand as Dunster Castle, then you'll be disappointed. This castle is in fact a group of earthworks on a hill fort. In local folklore, this site is hollow and inside is hidden treasure. Several times it's been dug into in the past by archaeologists and treasure hunters alike. Victorian clergyman the Reverend F. Waugh documented the story of a band of workmen that came here in the 1750s. He wrote as follows: "Before they had found a single coin, they were seized with panic fear, renounced their presumptuous enterprise, and, wonderful and awful to relate, within 1 month, some by accident, some by sudden death, and some by violent fevers, all paid with their lives the penalty of their covetous and most presumptuous attempt. Oh, if that most veracious legend were universally published as a warning to all wanton mutilators of ancient earthworks." A similar story takes place at Roborough Camp, a prehistoric hill fort which was reported by the Reverend J.W. Collins to the British Archaeological Association in 1857. I went to the site of the hill fort, but there isn't much really to see, as you've no doubt noticed, but there were said to be iron gates hidden in the embankment leading down to an iron castle deep underground, in which lies treasure guarded by gnomes and goblins. Their groans were said to scare away any that might come near. The gates can only be found at nights of the full moon by digging in silence. In the 1790s, one Dr. Farrer came to the location on a full moon night, bringing with him a servant to do the digging. He told the man to dig until the spade hit the iron gates, but on no account speak a word. As soon as the spade hit metal, unearthly noises arose and goblins flooded out of the hole. The servant screamed, "Lord, have mercy on my soul," but the goblins grabbed his legs and began to drag him into the mound. Dr. Farrer rushed to his aid and pulled him back, and immediately after, the sides of the pit caved in and the mound healed over as if there'd never been any digging. The moral of the story is, just leave treasure hidden in old hill forts alone. Heading right down to the Dorset border now, the Blackdown Hills have been known for centuries to be the home of Pixies. Richard Bovett wrote in 1684 that several people in the area had informed him that they'd seen the Pixies in this area. They held a market here frequently, and they were described as being dressed in high-crowned hats. A 17th century account of the Pixie markets in the Blackdown Hills report all sorts of commodities, such as shoemakers, peddlers, fruit sellers, and drinking booths. Those that tried to mingle with the Pixies, though, were punished with lameness. So, those wishing to encounter these little people should simply observe them from a distance and not bother them, even if their intentions are good. On to the town of Wellington now, to the church of St. John the Baptist. I'd read that in the corner of this church was a very elaborate tomb with quite an odd story attached to it. And lo and behold, there was the tomb bigger than I expected. But the figure I'm looking for is around the back, next to the wall.
Now this here is Sir John Popham, and throughout his youth he was a very shady character. The company that he kept was entirely criminals, thieves, miscreants, and of course he was involved in all those activities as well. But when he turned 30, his wife tried to convince him to turn his life around a bit. So he took up the studying of law, and he went on to become the Speaker of the House of Commons and even the Chief Justice. A natural career path for a former thief and criminal.
Interesting fact about this bloke, he presided over the trials of the gunpowder plotters. However, he was widely considered to have been both cruel and corrupt in his judgments. Allegedly, he'd enabled his cousin, Wild Will Darrell, to escape a charge of murder in exchange for being made heir to his estate in Wiltshire. Popham finally met his end, though, while out hunting, when his horse stumbled on a steep hillside near the present Wellington Memorial you can see here, where we've been before, on the Blackdown Hills. He fell into a gully below and broke his neck or drowned. The gully he fell into was said to be bottomless, leading straight down to hell. His ghost was said to have been held captive there for a while, but thanks to the prayers of his pious wife, he was allowed to emerge and begin a slow return to the tomb in Wellington Church, crawling through an underground tunnel at the rate of 1 cockstride a year. He's still completing that journey to this day. Athelney is the setting for one of the most famous anecdotes in English history, the story of King Alfred and the cakes. King Alfred the Great was in a desperate situation. The Danes had defeated him, and he was now on the run, living in the Somerset levels with the English waging a guerrilla war on the Danish invaders. At Athelney, Alfred took shelter in the home of a woman who was making cakes over a fire. She had to head out to collect more firewood and asked the king to watch over the cakes to ensure they don't burn. But Alfred's mind is weighing heavy with his kingdom being taken by invaders, and he fails to notice the cakes burning. When the peasant woman returns, she's furious that Alfred just sat by and watched the cakes burn. It's here that the story took place, and here that Alfred founded a monastery. Now long gone, nothing visible remains of the structure, but there is a monument to the great king, built in 1801. Simple, but splendid.
I must admit, this is an absolutely stunning location, and I'm really glad that I managed to get here as the sun was going down. It just makes the place really tranquil. Be a nice place to sit and reflect. I imagine Alfred probably did a lot of that when he was here. What a truly beautiful part of the world.
It wouldn't be a visit to the West Country without a story of a black dog, and I found a tale that takes place on Budleigh Hill near Selworthy. According to a story from the 19th century, a traveller who encountered a black dog spoke about it to a sexton and was given the following explanation. A coffin was being carried that way from Horner Mill when one of the handles broke loose, so the bearers halted to knock it back into place with a stone. Unfortunately, while doing this, they drove a nail through the wood and into the skull of the deceased man. This released the dead man's spirit in the form of a black dog. A witness to this dog in 1907 mentions the beast running at his side, jet black and with red fiery eyes as big as saucers. It ran on until the water crossed under a road, which it was unable to cross, and it combusted into the air like a flash of fire. Nunney Castle was built in 1373 by Sir John Delamere after securing permission to do so from King Edward III. There's a story of a ghostly woman wearing a cloak that's said to walk beside the moat at dawn. Not much at all is known about her, but local folklore says that she was accused of witchcraft and put to death outside the castle walls. A large black horse and rider are said to trot down the main street of Nunney and head up to the castle entrance, sometimes accompanied by a large black dog. Some speculate that the rider is Richard Prater, who was forced to surrender the castle to Cromwell in the English Civil War. There were rumours, too, of buried treasure somewhere beneath the castle ruins, but if we've learned anything from stories of treasure in Somerset, it's best to just leave it alone. My final stop on this wonderful tour of Somerset was the village of Kilmersdon. It's almost certain that you've heard of the nursery rhyme Jack and Jill. You know the one. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. But very few people know that the hill and the well mentioned in this rhyme are found in this village of Kilmersdon in Somerset. Here there's a big hill, and at the top of the hill there's a well. Local folklore has been passed down for generations, telling how Jack and Jill were unmarried lovers that lived in Kilmersdon some 500 years ago, and used to meet daily on the hilltop, using the excuse that they were fetching water. To get there, Jack had to pass Batstone Quarry, where one day he was killed by rockfall. Soon after his death, Jill died in childbirth, and of course the child was Jack's. The orphan boy was simply known as Jill's son, which is the explanation as to why the surname Jilson would become common in this area, and the girls in the district were rarely named Jill for fear that they might become immoral. Sadly, however, the story might not be as old as we think, as the earliest documented text of the rhyme, from the 1760s, gives the names as Jack and Jill, the latter being a boy's name. But stories get changed and added to over the years. There's likely some truth in this tale, somewhere in the village's history. And so concludes this wonderful trip. Over 20 locations showcasing the rich legends and stories of such a beautiful county in England. I'd wanted to see the southwest for so long, and I feel like my week in Somerset was such a fantastic introduction. Of course, there are countless other stories here, and what I've recorded is nowhere near a complete catalogue of Somerset tales, but it is a good introduction, I think. A huge thanks to Joe, who was kind enough to show me half the places I was able to showcase here, and to my patrons, who helped me cover the excessive costs of an expedition such as this. Petrol, accommodation, entry prices, food, and time, it's not cheap, and so these people help make it possible. If you've enjoyed my content and want to help me continue the preservation of British folklore, you might consider supporting me too. Hopefully, this will be the first of many full-length documentaries, which begs the question, which county should be next?